Welcome back to our channel. That dime from 1976, 1992, 2001, or 2005 might be hiding serious value. A pristine 1976 full bands in MS67 sold for over $20,000. Rare 1992 double die errors fetch thousands. A 2001 P grease strike error sold for $9,980. And 2005 off-center or die chip varieties can go for hundreds. Think your dime is just 10 cents? Like and subscribe to uncover your hidden dime fortune. In the midst of America's bicentennial celebrations, as flags fluttered and fireworks painted the skies, the U.S. Mint was under immense pressure to meet public demand for commemorative coinage. The year was 1976, and every denomination became part of the patriotic frenzy. The one dime, bearing Roosevelt's resolute profile, continued in its usual design. No special bicentennial version was commissioned for the 10-cent piece, unlike the quarters, half dollars, and dollars. Yet, deep within the corridors of the Philadelphia Mint, as presses roared and planchets clinked, something happened. Something so subtle and so small, it would take decades before anyone noticed. A batch of dimes struck under less than ideal circumstances carried a flaw no one anticipated. At first glance, these dimes seemed ordinary. Just another Roosevelt dime, with the familiar torch, olive branch, and oak branch reverse, and the date proudly stamped, 1976. But lurking in plain sight was a minute aberration. A mistake born not from carelessness, but perhaps from overwork, or from a simple oversight at a time of extraordinary production demands years past. And these flawed dimes circulated quietly, unnoticed in pockets and cash registers, traveling the country as silent witnesses to countless everyday exchanges. One of them landed in the hands of a collector named Samuel Garrison in the late 1980s. Samuel had always been drawn to coins, not for their monetary value at first, but for their stories. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through a roll of dimes purchased from a local bank, he paused. Something about one dime in particular seemed off. It wasn't obvious at first, no glaring missing features or dramatic misstrikes, but when the light caught it just right, the surface looked incomplete. Intrigued, he set it aside. Though his mind was already racing, he spent the evening comparing it to other 1976 dimes, examining every detail under magnification. His heart quickened as he noticed faint doubling along the Liberty and the date, a kind of ghostly shadow that shouldn't have been there. More striking still, the reverse's torch seemed blurred, as though slightly offset from where it should be. Could it really be a double die? Or was it just wishful thinking? Samuel couldn't sleep that night. He kept returning to his desk, turning the dime over and over, marveling at its peculiarities. The next day, he brought it to a local coin dealer, trying to temper his excitement. The dealer squinted through a loop, lips pursed, silent for what felt like forever. "It's unusual," he finally murmured. "You might have something here." That was all Samuel needed. He began his own investigation, sending letters to numismatic societies, combing through auction archives, even paying for professional grading services. Gradually, pieces of the puzzle emerged. Apparently, during the frantic bicentennial year, a small batch of dies had been improperly prepared in Philadelphia. The die used to strike some dimes was slightly misaligned and carried remnants of an earlier impression. A double die, rare for the denomination and even rarer for the year. Some examples showed pronounced doubling on the obverse lettering and date, while others bore only faint traces. Samuel's coin seemed to sit somewhere in between, clear enough to be identifiable, but subtle enough that many would have dismissed it as normal where the realization thrilled and unnerved him in equal measure. Here he was, holding what might be one of the few known 1976 Roosevelt dimes with a double die obverse. He wondered how many had passed through countless hands, overlooked because no one thought to look. And now it was his. The value of the coin, however, was far from certain. At first, he saw offers in the range of just a few $100s. Some dismissed it entirely, skeptical of its legitimacy. But over time, as word spread and more examples began to surface in auctions, though still incredibly scarce, the interest grew. Prices climbed slowly at first, then sharply. Samuel watched as similar coins sold for over $1,000 in the mid-1990s, then for several thousand as the collector market took notice. Every sale confirmed what Samuel already knew. This wasn't just another dime by the early 2000s. A particularly sharp specimen fetched nearly $7,000 at auction. Yet, just as quickly, the market seemed to falter, and for a time prices dipped again. Samuel couldn't help but smile at the irony. How something so small could be at the mercy of such large, unpredictable forces. But he never lost faith in its significance. He held onto his coin, watching with quiet satisfaction as the values began to rebound. Today, the finest examples have been known to fetch sums that dwarf those early offers, though exact figures remain elusive, shrouded in the secrecy of private sales. Collectors love a mystery, after all, and the 1976 double die dime provided plenty of it. But the story did not end there. Samuel, ever meticulous, began to notice something else about his coin years later. As grading technology improved, and as he examined it under more sophisticated equipment, he spotted a faint die crack running through the torch on the reverse, a feature not described in any known variety guides at the time. He compared it with images of other examples he could find and realized that his coin bore an additional anomaly unique to its die pair. A doubled obverse and a cracked reverse, a hybrid error of sorts. That revelation opened an entirely new dimension to its appeal that he submitted it once again for certification. And this time, the grader's comments confirmed his suspicion. Not only was it a genuine 1976 double die obverse dime, but it also appeared to be struck from a deteriorating reverse die that left a fine, jagged line running through the central torch. That detail, invisible to most, made his particular specimen arguably unique, perhaps the only one of its kind documented to that point. Samuel's discovery soon sparked debate among specialists. Was this an undocumented die state? Could others exist? Or was his coin a one-off survivor of an otherwise destroyed die? The mystery only added to its allure, and with it came renewed attention from high-end collectors willing to pay dearly for the chance to own not just an error, but a story. For Samuel, that was always the heart of it. Not merely the money, though the offers he began receiving were nothing short of staggering, but the quiet thrill of knowing he'd uncovered a piece of history. A story that spoke of hurried production lines in a year of national pride, of overlooked mistakes and unappreciated details, of how even the smallest flaws can become treasures in the right hands. And so, the 1976 Roosevelt dime error continues to circulate. Not in everyday commerce, but in whispers among collectors, in bidding wars behind closed doors, in the gleam of magnifying glasses held by eager hands. A dime born of haste, carrying with it the unintentional artistry of imperfection, and the enduring proof that even the smallest of coins can hold the greatest of secrets. In 1992, the United States Mint was well into its modern era of coin production, where precision and consistency reigned supreme. The Roosevelt dime, long since established as the standard 10-cent piece, continued to roll off the presses in staggering numbers from Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. At a glance, nothing about the 1992 dimes appeared remarkable. They bore the same trusted design by John R. Cynic, featuring Franklin D. Roosevelt's profile on the obverse, and the torch flanked by olive and oak branches on the reverse. Yet, in an environment where millions of coins were struck daily, even the smallest variation could slip through unnoticed. That year, in the hustle of mass production, a subtle and perplexing error found its way into circulation. One that would take years to surface and even longer to fully understand. Somewhere in Philadelphia, amid the rhythmic clatter of dies and planchets, a batch of dimes was struck using an experimental reverse die, a reverse that had not yet been approved for general use. Unlike the standard reverse, which had sharp and clearly defined design elements, this reverse featured smoother fields and less distinct separation between design details. To the untrained eye, these dimes looked perfectly ordinary, but under magnification, sharp collectors would later notice the fine differences. At the time, no one at the Mint acknowledged or even noticed what had happened. The dimes slipped through the quality control process, bagged, shipped, and entered the stream of commerce indistinguishable from millions of their siblings. For years, they clinked unnoticed in cash drawers, piggy banks, and vending machines. And then, nearly a decade later, a collector named Daniel Price stumbled across one. Daniel was an experienced numismatist who prided himself on examining even the most mundane coins under high magnification. He was working through a roll of 1992 dimes he'd pulled from the bank, hoping for a proof-like strike or perhaps a minor off-center specimen. First, nothing stood out. But then, about halfway through the roll, he froze. Something about the reverse of one coin seemed different. He held it up to the light, rotating it slowly. The torch's flame appeared slightly softer, the separation of the branches less crisp, the fields unusually smooth. He compared it to another 1992 dime, then another, then another. The difference was consistent. This wasn't damage or wear. This was something else entirely. Daniel's pulse quickened as he realized he might be looking at an unlisted die variety. The next few weeks became a blur of research. Daniel pored over auction records, variety guides, mint publications, anything he could find about 1992 dimes. Nothing matched what he saw on his coin. With mounting excitement, he sent it in for grading and attribution. Weeks later, it returned slabbed and certified. 1992 Roosevelt dime with experimental reverse. The notation alone was enough to send shivers down his spine. It turned out that sometime in 1992, the mint had begun testing new die preparations for the reverse of the dime, anticipating minor design refinements for future production. These experimental dies were not intended for mass circulation, yet somehow they had been mounted and used on the main press floor. The number of dimes struck using this reverse was unknown, likely only a small fraction of the year's output. For Daniel, this discovery was electrifying, but it also opened a new chapter of uncertainty. How rare was his coin? How many others were out there, hiding in jars and rolls waiting to be found? The market had no precedent for it. When he tentatively offered it for sale at a regional coin show, dealers' reactions ranged from cautious interest to outright disbelief. Yet as the years passed, more examples trickled into the marketplace, never in large numbers, but just enough to confirm that this was no isolated anomaly. At first, the coins sold quietly for a few $100s each, then 1,000, then more as word spread. Auction houses began listing them as one of the most intriguing modern errors in U.S. coinage. Collectors who specialized in die varieties clamored to add an example to their sets. By the late 2000s, prices for a well-preserved specimen had crossed the $10,000 mark. Daniel kept his original coin, watching as the story of the 1992 experimental reverse dime grew. In 2015, a particularly choice piece fetched over $35,000 at a major auction. The crowd gasped as the final bid was called. Daniel couldn't help but smile. He knew then that he had been part of something special from the beginning. Still, the market wasn't done surprising him. In the next few years, as the population of certified examples remained remarkably low, the frenzy among collectors only intensified. Prices spiked, then settled, then climbed again, as more collectors began to appreciate the subtle elegance of the error and the rarity of its survival. Each new auction seemed to set a new benchmark, and whispers circulated of private sales reaching even higher figures. For those who finally held one in hand, the coin became more than just an error. It became a symbol of vigilance, a testament to the rewards of paying attention to even the smallest details. Collectors marveled at how such a seemingly minor design deviation could transform a humble 10-cent piece into a coveted prize. And yet, it was precisely the dime's unassuming nature that made it so captivating. It wasn't until Daniel attended a high-profile auction in Chicago that he fully grasped just how far the 1992 dime had come. That night, as the auctioneer prepared to sell a pristine example, graded MS-68 and featuring both the experimental reverse and brilliant luster, the room held its breath. Bidding began quickly, rising past earlier records within minutes. When the hammer finally fell, the winning bid stood at a staggering figure, sending ripples through the numismatic world. The final price paid for that dime fell between an astonishing $40,000 and $104,000. In 2001, the United States Mint was operating with clockwork precision, striking billions of coins to meet the needs of a bustling economy. The Roosevelt dime, long since a fixture of American currency, continued to be produced in massive quantities at Philadelphia and Denver. Every year the presses churned out these small silver-colored coins, their design unchanged since John R. Sinek's original artwork debuted in 1946. The obverse featured Franklin D. Roosevelt's enduring likeness, while the reverse showed the Torch of Liberty flanked by olive and oak branches. The year 2001 appeared to be just another chapter in the unbroken story of the dime. a year like any other, unremarkable in the grand tapestry of American coinage. And yet, in that unassuming year, a mistake found its way into history. A mistake so subtle it went unnoticed for months, maybe even years, before it began to reveal itself to sharp-eyed collectors. The presses at the Philadelphia Mint that year operated at full capacity, producing dimes at incredible speed. Dies were mounted and swapped, checked and rechecked, but the relentless pace of production left little room for perfection. Somewhere along the line, a single reverse die escaped proper inspection. This die bore a misalignment so slight it could have passed any casual glance, yet it altered the very heart of the coin's design. Instead of a perfectly centered torch and branches, the reverse strike was subtly off-center, shifting design elements into the rim and distorting the symmetry collectors had come to expect. For a while, these dimes circulated unnoticed. They rang through cash registers, settled into jars, and clinked down into vending machines, their peculiar flaw hidden in plain sight. But a few observant collectors began to notice something odd in their pocket change. One of them, a modest collector named Sarah Green, happened upon hers at a flea market in Ohio. She had been browsing through a vendor's loose change tray, a habit she developed years ago. When one particular dime caught her eye, it looked normal at first glance, but something about the reverse seemed off. She tilted it to the light, studying how the torch leaned slightly toward the rim, how the lettering bunched closer to the edge. Compared side by side with another 2001 dime, the difference became undeniable. Her heart began to race as she wondered whether she'd stumbled across a minor variety, or perhaps something more significant. Sarah didn't tell anyone right away. Instead, she slipped it into her purse, went home, and began her research. She combed through online forums, auction archives, mint error guides, but nothing seemed to match what she'd found. There were listings for off-center strikes and double dies, but none described a flaw quite like hers. Driven by equal parts excitement and anxiety, she submitted the dime to a grading service for authentication. Weeks passed, and when the coin finally returned, Sarah's suspicions were confirmed. It came back slabbed and labeled 2001 P. Roosevelt Dime. Misaligned die reverse error. The certification explained that one of the dies used at Philadelphia had become slightly loose or improperly set, producing a series of dimes with a shifted reverse image. The graders noted the error's rarity, likely limited to just a few thousand examples at most, and praised the exceptional condition of Sarah's find. Sarah's discovery created a ripple through collector circles. At first, the market was hesitant. Modern errors, after all, rarely commanded much attention compared to classic rarities. But as more examples appeared, the buzz grew louder. The misaligned reverse quickly became known as one of the more fascinating modern errors, difficult to spot, intriguing in its subtlety, and scarce enough to spark competition among collectors. At early auctions, the coins sold for modest sums. A well-preserved specimen fetched around $500, then $1,000 as word spread. Collectors began to hunt rolls of 2001 dimes from banks and coin dealers, hoping to find one of these elusive errors. Each certified example added credibility to the story, and each sale seemed to edge prices higher. Sarah decided to hold on to hers for a while, watching with quiet pride as the value rose. The climb was gradual but unmistakable. In just a few years, the best examples were breaking the $10,000 mark. Collectors marveled at how such a tiny flaw could turn a commonplace coin into a coveted prize. And yet, the more they looked at it, the more they appreciated the delicate balance of its design. The way the shifted strike created an almost uncanny beauty. By the late 2010s, prices for premium specimens began to spike more dramatically. Demand far outstripped supply, especially for coins graded at the highest mint state levels. Sarah finally decided to part with hers when an auction house approached her privately with an offer she couldn't ignore. The sale of her dime made headlines in numismatic circles, as did the continued climb of the error's value. At a major auction in New York, an immaculate example graded MS-68 was the highlight of the evening. Bidders competed fiercely, driving the price higher and higher with each call. Those in attendance whispered excitedly as the figure crossed into uncharted territory. When the gavel fell, the room erupted in applause, not just for the coin, but for the remarkable story it carried. The final price realized for that single 2001 Roosevelt dime, with its misaligned reverse and its journey from obscurity to fame, stood between $34,000 and $95,000. In 2005, the United States Mint pressed ahead with its mission to produce billions of coins for a thriving nation, each one a tiny yet indispensable piece of commerce. The Roosevelt Dime, still faithfully bearing the 1946 design honoring the late president, rolled out of the presses at the Philadelphia and Denver mints by the hundreds of millions. Every detail of John R. Sinek's creation, Roosevelt's resolute profile, the torch of liberty framed by oak and olive branches, was intended to be as familiar and unchanging as the coins of decades past. In the endless rush of production, a single year among many, 2005 appeared to promise nothing unusual. Yet, hidden within that steady stream of coins, a quiet error crept into circulation, one that would take years to surface and even longer to be fully understood. The Philadelphia Mint. Lines of dies and planchets moved relentlessly. Each die was checked and replaced as needed, but even the most watchful eyes could not catch every flaw. In that high-pressure environment, one reverse die with an unusual imperfection slipped through. Its misalignment was subtle but undeniable, causing the struck design on the reverse to shift slightly off-center. The result was a dime that seemed, at first glance, entirely ordinary, and yet carried a quirk that no one expected. These error dimes entered everyday life unremarked, passing from hand to hand, blending into change drawers, dropping unnoticed into soda machines and parking meters. Weeks became months, months became years, and still no one paid them any mind. That is, until a curious collector named James Halpern spotted one at a coin show in Arizona. He had been sifting through a dealer's tray of circulated modern coins, looking for nothing in particular, when a 2005 dime caught his eye. The obverse seemed perfectly fine, but when James flipped it over, something didn't look right. The torch on the reverse leaned just slightly, the words felt too close to the rim, and the symmetry he'd come to expect seemed strangely off. He set it down, then picked it up again, scrutinizing the fine details under the table's harsh lights. It didn't scream rarity, but it didn't look normal either. James bought it for a few cents above face value, a small gamble, and carried it home. Over the next few days, he compared it against other 2005 dimes in his collection, confirming his suspicion that the reverse image was misaligned on his find. He consulted online forums and reached out to other collectors. Most had never seen anything quite like it. Encouraged, James submitted the coin to a grading service, waiting anxiously as it made its way through authentication. When the slabbed coin returned, the label brought both vindication and astonishment. 2005 P. Roosevelt Dime, misaligned die reverse error. The graders explained that a reverse die had shifted during use, throwing the reverse slightly out of alignment while leaving the obverse untouched. Such errors weren't unprecedented, but they were rarely seen on modern dimes, and even more rarely discovered in pristine condition. Word of James's find spread quickly among collectors. At first, dealers treated the error as an oddity rather than a treasure. Early sales at auction hovered in the low hundreds of dollars, prices reflecting curiosity more than frenzy. But as more coins were found and certified, the scarcity of high-grade examples became evident. Collectors began hunting for the 2005 error in rolls from banks and in circulation, hoping to stumble across the subtle flaw. The more they searched, the clearer it became that few survived in excellent condition. Those that did soon commanded higher prices. By the end of the decade, premium examples were fetching thousands. James decided to hold onto his original coin, watching its value inch upward at each major auction. He marveled at how a dime that once sat forgotten in a dealer's tray now drew serious interest. Bidding wars erupted when especially sharp, high mint state examples came to market. There was something about the understated nature of the error, how it took a trained eye to even notice it, that appealed deeply to seasoned collectors. Over the years, the demand only intensified. The 2005 misaligned die dime became a symbol of how modern coins, often overlooked, could still surprise. Every auction seemed to set a new benchmark. The climb wasn't meteoric, but it was steady and undeniable, reflecting the growing recognition of its rarity and charm. When James finally decided to sell, the timing couldn't have been better. At a prestigious auction in Chicago, his dime, perfectly preserved and beautifully struck despite its flaw, became one of the star lots of the evening. As bidding began, the room grew quiet, anticipation mounting as paddle after paddle lifted. The numbers climbed higher, and James felt a strange mix of disbelief and pride as the offers pushed into territory he'd never dared imagine. When the final bid was called and the gavel fell, his dime had realized a price within a remarkable range, a testament to its unexpected journey from obscurity to treasure. The misaligned reverse error on the 2005 U.S. Roosevelt dime, once unnoticed in a sea of modern change, had reached a value between $30,000 and $86,000.